Caden Lee is the most underrated player in the entire SEC.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast. I am your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. So thank you for making us your first listen every day. And a special shout out to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. On today's show, we dive into why Austin Simmons has a leg up this season, and it's all thanks to Caden Lee emerging as an all-SEC level weapon for the Rebels. These two already have insane chemistry. Look at the highlights last year of Austin Simmons to see that. And after Lee's breakout 2024, their 2025 connection could be legendary in Ole Miss history. Plus, we break down Ole Miss's massive comeback win over LSU and what it means for the Rebels' NCAA tournament hopes. This is a team that is now likely a lock for March Madness, and don't sleep on Dre Davis. His emergence is a game changer for Ole Miss basketball. And for your second listen, check out Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy for more takes on college football and the SEC. Stay locked in. This is Locked On Ole Miss. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So, Caden Lee was the breakout player in 2024 in the wide receiver unit. Even though you had a Trey Harris on there who was a Biletnikoff candidate, you had Jordan Watkins who was Jackson Dart's security blanket. Caden Lee became a really good option for Jackson Dart and ended up leading Ole Miss in receiving as far as catches with 57 over the course of the season. This is a big deal because Caden Lee emerged as Mr. Reliable for Jackson Dart, and he has spent the better part of the last 2 years working with Austin Simmons. As far as during his rise to the starting lineup, Austin Simmons did some work with him, and they developed quite a bit of chemistry. And Austin Simmons coming in and being an SEC quarterback, you need security blankets. You just do at the college level. You need security blankets. And Caden Lee is emerging as one of those Wes Welker type slot receivers in these offense. Now, Ole Miss, we've talked many times over the last couple of weeks, there's some tweaks and some changes that are likely coming to the offense. I do not think tempo is going to change that much as far as no huddle. I think the issue is going to be Ole Miss is going to potentially run more 12 personnel. And in that, if they do that, that means that Caden Lee, I think, is still going to play ball and move out to one of the outside wide receivers. So when you look at Deshaun Stribling and Trey Wallace and all of these players that Ole Miss brought in, I don't know that any of them is going to displace Caden Lee on the field. I think it's a situation to where Ole Miss has a top 5 wide receivers they rank, okay? You have a top 5 wide receivers. Let's say Caden Lee, Deshaun Stribling, Trey Wallace, Caleb Odom, and Deuce Alexander. You know, those are the top 5 wide receivers, hypothetically, in this system. If one of those players gets injured, that just moves up, and those players kind of move around on the offensive end. That's what Ole Miss has done for 5 years. So I don't expect them to change that right now. And the reason I bring that up is Caden Lee's a slot receiver, but if Ole Miss runs 12 personnel, you're going to have tight ends getting on the field where a slot receiver normally would be. I think Caden Lee becomes the number 2 at that point, or the number 1, honestly, at that point. And his chemistry that he's developed with Austin Simmons is something else. There's not a lot of passing yards that has happened on Austin Simmons. He's been 19 to 32, 282 yards, 2 touchdowns. One of those touchdowns, and his first touchdown, I think it was his first pass ever at Ole Miss against Furman, Austin Simmons threw a touchdown pass to Caden Lee. Caden Lee only had a couple of TDs on the season, but one of them came from Austin Simmons, and he is going to be a major factor in the development of Austin Simmons. Caden Lee last season had 57 catches, 874 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Mr. Reliable did not drop a single pass over the course of the season. That's the reason I think it's going to be a big deal. Austin Simmons has massive confidence already in what Caden Lee can do. And Caden Lee has developed into an all-SEC level wide receiver at Ole Miss. He averaged over 15 yards per catch last season for Ole Miss. He did not score touchdowns, but between the 20s, he was hell. And he kind of became that security blanket that Jordan Watkins was for Jackson Dart, because at the beginning of the season, people, if you remember, Jordan Watkins was injured. That allowed Caden Lee to kind of put a stranglehold on that slot position and just became a dude. Before that stranglehold happened, his work with Austin Simmons happened. So Austin Simmons' development is going to be just basically tied to Caden Lee, because in the beginning, it's going to be Caden Lee and it's going to be Daquan Wright, if we're going to be honest. Daquan Wright caught the other Austin Simmons touchdown this season. He had 27 catches, 394 yards, and 4 touchdowns. These two wide receivers are going to be crucial for Austin Simmons going into the fall. Now, you have the Deshaun Striblings, you have the Trey Alexanders, you have the Caleb Odoms, the Deuce Alexanders, the Traylon Rays. Those guys are going to be big as well, along with the Winston Watkins, the Caleb Cunninghams, the Dylan Alfords, and the Samari Reeds. This wide receiver room is deeper than it has been probably since AJ and DK was roaming the field. So there's going to be a lot of weapons for Austin Simmons, but these are the two players that have definite chemistry already established with Austin Simmons. It's going to be pretty big, because if you look at Ole Miss's schedule next season, August 30th against Georgia State, that's a good G5 way to start the season. It's not an FCS game. It's not like last season was. Then it's at Kentucky. You have to be ready to go by September 6th. You have to know exactly what you have. September 13th, Arkansas at home. September 20th, Tulane at home. September 27th, LSU at home. October 11th, Washington State at home. That is a 5-week homestand that Ole Miss has. Their schedule is more beneficial than I've ever seen an Ole Miss schedule be. The game at Georgia is going to be difficult. The game at Oklahoma is going to be difficult. South Carolina at home, the Citadel, Florida at home, and at Mississippi State. 2 of your 4 road games are against the teams that finished 15th and 16th in the SEC. So ideally, this is the schedule that you are looking forward to. This is the schedule that kind of all comes together. And if you can pull out these wins, they're going to be tough games. It's the SEC. It's not guaranteed that just because it's at home, you're going to win the game. Ask Lane Kiffin about Kentucky last year. But Lane Kiffin traditionally wins home games. And if Ole Miss can string together that away and get to 10, because that's the goal, get to 10, which means the Oklahoma game is probably the linchpin game in the season, and winning your home games, that gives you a little bit of a leeway. If you can do that, you're a playoff team. And it's because of the schedule and all of that. And it's going to be largely due to the emergence of Austin Simmons and Caden Lee and Daquan Wright helping Austin in the early part of the season, while the Deshaun Striblings, while the Trey Wallace and the Caleb Cunninghams and the Winston Watkins, those guys become a legit threat. This wide receiver unit has a chance to be unbelievably special, and it will be led by Caden Lee, who is an all-SEC level quality starter, and he could be a genuine all-SEC player catching 70 or 80 passes next season. I'm expecting a huge year from Caden Lee because of that chemistry with Austin Simmons and what we saw in the Georgia game last year. Austin Simmons' first pass went to Caden Lee. They have a connection that they use really well, and I'm pretty excited about all of that. So after Ole Miss's furious comeback against LSU, is this team right now a lock for the NCAA tournament? With 7 games left in the SEC slate and 7 wins, just how high can the Rebels climb? We break it all down next. You know, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel. That is America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or whatever and want to bet a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets to a same game parlay. Example, I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Can you imagine if you were able to live bet a comeback with 3 minutes to go in the game with LSU up 11 points, take Ole Miss to win that game? How much fun and how exciting that would be. It's just all there with FanDuel. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Ole Miss came back late last Saturday night, and I understand that a lot of Ole Miss fans cut it off, but they missed perhaps one of the greatest comebacks in Ole Miss basketball history. I can remember, heck, in the NCAA tournament a couple of years ago, there was a big comeback against BYU in one of the Dayton games that got Ole Miss to play Xavier. But this was a huge comeback. LSU was up by 11 points with about 3 minutes to go. They had a 98% chance of winning the game. Ole Miss scored the last 13 points of the game and ended up winning that game. So the question becomes, is Ole Miss a lock for the NCAA tournament? Is Ole Miss looking at making it into the field? And this is the JBR bracketology page on Twitter. They put that out there. He goes through and just makes calls when players and teams are locks for the NCAA tournament. He puts the date when he made that prediction on there. He had Duke and Auburn as the first two. Iowa State made it in there. Kansas, Arizona, all of that. Texas A&M was the last SEC team that made it into the field until last night. Put this tweet out. Dre Davis's game-winning tip-in locked in the Rebels to the NCAA tournament. The Rebels became the 6th SEC team and the 18th lock overall. Ole Miss now sits at 18-6, 7-4, and a proud owner of one of the best wins in the season with a true road win at Alabama. Remarkable two-year coaching job by Chris Beard to get the Rebels not only dancing, but a legitimate shot at a top 4 projected seed. This will be Ole Miss's first NCAA tournament appearance since an 8 seed. That was against Oklahoma, I think, under Kermit Davis. Welcome to March Madness. So JBR bracketology says that Ole Miss is a lock. And if you want to be realistic about it, yes, Ole Miss is probably a lock, because for Ole Miss to not be a lock, that means they have to lose 7 straight games and go one and done essentially in the SEC tournament. And Ole Miss has games against South Carolina, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma, teams that Ole Miss should be favored to beat as well. So if Ole Miss is a lock for the NCAA tournament and Ole Miss is kind of playing for seeding at this point, which I honestly believe they are, what does that mean? How high can legitimately Ole Miss get? Now, if Ole Miss ran the table, beat Auburn, Florida, and Tennessee, you could be looking at like a 2 seed. I mean, if you want legit pie in the sky type stuff, that is that. If Ole Miss wins out, they probably could grab a 2 seed. But that is not likely. Auburn's going to be a difficult matchup in the jungle, and especially after they lost to Florida in the way they did at home. Bruce Pearl got his biggest gift of all, and he just gets to spend all day yelling at his team. He got to basically get on them, and now I bet you they're going to come out in the next couple of games and be really locked in. Florida's a really good team. Ole Miss plays down in Gainesville against Florida. Florida just beat Auburn in Auburn. When Florida plays really well like they did against Auburn, I don't know if there's a team in the country that can beat them. They're really good. But Florida is up and down. They're very yo-yo-y. And if they're down when Ole Miss plays them, Ole Miss can get them. They lost to Missouri a little bit earlier in the season. and Tennessee, which I think is an actual pretty good matchup for Ole Miss. As long as Ole Miss can chase them off of the three-point line and let them kind of be a slog defending team, I think Ole Miss has a chance to beat them. That could be the big top 10 win that is left on the schedule for Ole Miss. And then like I said, you have South Carolina, you have Mississippi State, you have Vanderbilt, you have Oklahoma. Those are the 7 games that are remaining on the schedule for Ole Miss. So if Ole Miss finishes that slate, let's say that Ole Miss wins their next 3 and gets to 10-4, beats Tennessee, that's 11-4, and beats Oklahoma, that's 12-6 potentially for Ole Miss, to where you finish up the SEC slate somewhere around 8 losses. I think a 3 or 4 seed at that case would be likely for Ole Miss. And, just to think about it, the last time that Ole Miss was even in these waters was their Sweet 16 run, when they took it to the Sweet 16 that year. And before that, it was the Valpo game, was the only 2 times that Ole Miss has even swam in these waters. So it is a rarity that Ole Miss is a lock for the NCAA tournament. But Ole Miss is exactly a lock right now, in my opinion, for the NCAA tournament. Because the only way that it could get iffy for Ole Miss is if Ole Miss dropped 7 in a row and went 1 and done in the SEC tournament. That's the only way it gets weird for Ole Miss basketball. And I don't think that is going to happen. That has a very low probability number of happening. So I do think that Ole Miss is a lock for the NCAA tournament. I do think it's going to be amazing. And to let everybody know, Locked On and Amazon, they're teaming up to produce a March Madness show every night of the tournament, featuring potentially yours truly getting on there. They've rented out some TV studios in Dallas, Texas, and they're going to do a full-on production, and it's supposed to be the highest level production that Locked On has ever done. So it would be really interesting to see what happens. They're going to go down to Dallas and do what they have to do, but there's 4 hosts where they're going to do basically a score desk, and it's going to be like the Charles Barkley and guys in the NCAA tournament, but it's going to be the Locked On version of it. And they're going to get the guests from around the country to see exactly how that goes. It should be completely awesome if we're going to be real about it. And there's a chance, I'm on there for the women's basketball because they're going to be doing the women's tournament as well as the men's tournament. I could be on for both of those, so that would be awesome. So we'll see exactly what that happens going into the surgery. Talking about that LSU game on Saturday, I do want to bring this up real quick, because Ole Miss didn't play particularly well for about 37 minutes of that game. Ole Miss only shot 37.7%. LSU is an athletic, long team, not a particularly good shooting team, and not very cohesive as a unit, and they just did some really dumb things. But Ole Miss was only 6 of 23 from three-point range, and Sean Padula made 4 of those. Ole Miss had 5 turnovers on the game, coming off their 1 turnover game. 39 rebounds, 19 fouls. LSU shot 45% almost, 8 of 24 from 3, 10 turnovers, 40 rebounds, 23 fouls. Those 10 turnovers, a lot of them happened in the last 3 minutes of the ball game when Ole Miss scored the final 13 points in as well. It's a big deal, but the biggest deal that happened for Ole Miss in this game, in my opinion, is the fact that Ole Miss in the second half all of a sudden rebounded the ball really well. And at the end of the game, in their comeback, they had 4 or 5 offensive rebounds, including a tip-in at the buzzer by Dre Davis to win that game. Is that a sign that rebounding could be coming, that they figured something out in the rebounding category? Is it a situation to where the other team just didn't know how to win a game? Which that's possible. They're 1-9 in the SEC. There's a chance that they just don't know how to win a game. Ole Miss plays South Carolina this week. South Carolina is 0-9, 0-10, something like that. There's a chance they just don't know how to win a game. And if Ole Miss can pull that off, then you have the Mississippi State game at home. Then you have the Vanderbilt game, which Vanderbilt beat Texas. That's going to be a tough thing. But if Ole Miss can win all 4 of those and get to 10-4 in the Southeastern Conference, like I said, the world is their oyster. And I tell you what, in our final segment, we're going to talk about the emergence of Dre Davis and how important it is for the Rebel Hoops team. I talked about it last week as an X factor. Let's look a little bit more into this as well. Stick around. All right, so Dre Davis, he's really good player, and he has emerged over the last 3 out of the last 4 games. And coincidentally, Ole Miss has won 3 out of the last 4 games. Their only loss being to Auburn, which he fouled out of and didn't have a particularly good game as well. But Dre Davis is becoming the Robin that this team needed. Now, every single night, it seems like, Ole Miss has 4 or 5 players in double figures. You're not going to have somebody that scores 30 points or 35 points, but you're going to have a whole bunch of people that score 12 to 15, something like that. And Sean Padula is a guy that you can count on for scoring. I think he's leading Ole Miss in scoring in conference play. But after that, it's been pretty inconsistent. I mean, you can count a little bit on Jamin Breakfield's going to get you a right around that 10 line every night. Matthew Morrell is going to get you right around that 10 line every night. But at the beginning, when Ole Miss started off SEC play on a winning streak, it was Malik Dia, who was kind of the Robin to the leading scorer's Batman. Then, after the 4-game winning streak and Ole Miss beat Alabama, they had a 3-game losing streak to where teams seemingly figured out how to handle Malik Dia. And over the course of those 3 games, Ole Miss had to find somebody that was a secondary scorer that they could count on outside of those other 2 players. And Dre Davis is the guy that answered the bell. Dre Davis against LSU had 22 points, 7 rebounds, and the winning tip-in buzzer beater at the end of the game. He also played a really good game against Texas in the win and also went off against Kentucky as well, scoring about 17 points in each of those games. I could be a little bit off, but that seems to be the consensus in those 3 games. Now, against Auburn, like I said, he didn't necessarily show up, which Ole Miss lost that game. If Dre Davis would have performed at this level, Ole Miss would have likely been against Auburn in a different place. So it tells me he is the X factor on this team. It's not Sean Padula. It's not Juju Murray. It's not Malik Dia. It's not Jamin Breakfield. It's not Matthew Morrell. It is Dre Davis is the X factor on this team. And if you want to take this team from good to great, Dre Davis obviously takes a step. That's simply the way it works. And metrics and analytics would all probably point to that as well. The two best games that Ole Miss played this season was against Louisville in Louisville, to where Dre Davis scored 20 points and kind of went off, and Kentucky in Oxford. Dre Davis kind of went off in that game as well. Dre Davis is a player that provides Ole Miss something different than they can get from other places. That's one of the reasons he is so dynamic and so important to this basketball team. He is a different flavor of basketball player than Ole Miss has. He is a very physical guy when he decides that he wants to go. I've seen games to where he's been a little bit seemingly turned off a little bit, but I've also seen games where he's been really locked in. And when he is locked in, he becomes a menace, especially on the gas. On the glass. He is athletic enough and physical enough to be a problem for teams that are athletic and physical. Ole Miss has had trouble rebounding in those situations. So when Dre Davis takes it upon himself to dominate on the inside, like he did with 4 offensive rebounds against LSU at the end, and also the biggest play potentially of this season for Ole Miss, it's a big deal. He is a guy that if Ole Miss is going to make a run in Nashville in the SEC tournament, he is the one that if Ole Miss is going to make a run in March, is going to perform at a very high level. And if Ole Miss bounces out of the first round or in the second round or whatever they call it now, it is because that probably Dre Davis did not have his best game. I think as Dre Davis goes, the ceiling raises for Ole Miss basketball. You're going to be able to count on that Matthew Morrell and Jamin Brakefield and Sean Padula at this point. Juju Murray goes kind of up and down. He's another guy that could be an impact guy. So if Ole Miss is really good, probably means Dre Davis and Juju Murray is joining the other three and scoring a decent amount of points. But Dre Davis is the player that if Ole Miss makes a run, it's likely because he's playing really well. He is almost the Jason Smith of this basketball team for people that are my age and can remember those late 90s Ole Miss basketball teams that Keith Carter was on. That Jason Smith guy that just kind of did all the dirty work, could get a little scoring from time to time, but he was really just an engine type player. Jason Smith and Anthony Boone made that team. This Ole Miss basketball team is kind of developing characteristics in that area where Dre Davis and Matthew Morrell, they're kind of becoming that same type deal. So I'm pretty excited about where they could be. And like I said, the Locked On show with Amazon should happen as well coming up. So thank you for making us the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in all of college football. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Hotty toddy, everyone. And remember, analytics is just the old English word meaning bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.